Hello, friends, servers without money and deviants. Today we start our workday in the media. We begin with the top speaker, whom you all know well, and whom I have already announced a long time ago, Victor Kurtev. And we will talk about energy and the enforcement of peace. Good evening, Victor. Yes, we will talk about the energy of coercion because the energy factor will be key. One of the key factors, if not the most crucial, besides the military factor, in the architecture of the ongoing negotiations, the negotiation tracks that are currently underway. A multitude of various factors clearly indicates that the negotiations are undoubtedly accelerating. This is not only a statement from our authorities, not only a statement from Podolyak regarding Ukraine's readiness for negotiations, not only a statement from Zelensky and Yermak, but above all, it is the signals coming from the major players. Because after our foreign minister's visit to Kuleba in China, China suddenly said that it is interested in the negotiation process, and accordingly, there will be corresponding actions. The foreign minister of China might come here on August 23rd, as I mentioned, I believe, a week ago. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, is expected to visit Kyiv. And this is an intriguing track. Narendra Modi is a real heavyweight in global politics. Given that the administration of USA President Biden is indeed also in a very difficult situation after he withdrew from the race, and Kamala Harris is currently looking for opportunities to strengthen her position in the electoral process, it would be advantageous for the USA, for the Biden administration, to manage to end the war before the presidential elections. And in fact, their interests may align with the Chinese, because for the Chinese, the issue of ending the war before Trump, possibly Trump, comes to power is crucial, as they fear him due to his hardline anti-China stance. This would mean the possibility of concluding some package agreements with the states, which would give the Chinese room to maneuver. In short, all these stars that we in business, they have clearly laid it out, indicating that the track towards a ceasefire is undoubtedly and significantly accelerating. And essentially, energy plays a key role here, because we understand that the energy situation we enter the winter with, and whether there will be a war at that time or not, directly affects the future of the country. Because if we find ourselves in a situation of severe energy and economic crisis, plus under bombardment, the system could simply collapse. What do you think about this?
Let me first make just two such reservations. A few. First, this is undoubtedly a very important topic. The issue of war and peace, where people die every day, concerns everyone. It actually concerns the fate of the Second Ukrainian Republic. Therefore, it needs to be discussed. Undoubtedly, processes are happening. Over the past few weeks, the official position of Ukraine's leadership has significantly shifted, if not from the 1991 borders, then from indeed rather harsh rhetoric to a peace conference in November, already as a fact agreed upon at all levels. In fact, actually, I participated in several closed processes there, so I will choose my words carefully, because this is not just some analysis or information from open sources. This is a certain kind of insight. So, I will be choosing my words carefully. That's my first caveat. The second caveat is that we will be examining the situation specifically from an energy perspective. I do not claim to have expertise in the purely military sphere, so I ask you to understand me correctly and completely as well, because it's extremely easy to be smart about military topics when you're comfortably seated in an office with bright lights and air conditioning, and to tell the brave guys on the front lines to hold on just a little bit longer, and so on, with that in mind. Nevertheless, let's carefully discuss this from a purely analytical perspective. I see through all the various channels available to me that substantial work is being done on the peace track at different levels and by various entities. And directly to President Zelensky, there are indeed significant parties that are pressuring him on this peace track this year. And one of the main arguments is used energetically. Our entire energy system is hanging by a thread. Just one more combined complex strike, and everything will collapse, leaving us to freeze in the winter. This is indeed being used as a factor to force us into peace, under conditions that are quite, well, very, I would say, extremely unfavorable for Ukraine, in fact. Actually, indeed, moreover, what I hear is even up to the voluntary withdrawal to the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, the rest along the line of demarcation, and a peace in the area of the Zaporizhzhia NPP, we will somehow carve it out, decide something about its legal status, so that in winter, 2 or 3 blocks of the Zaporizhzhia NPP could work for Ukraine, for example, and we wouldn't have to move the institute.
But there are 6 of them.
No, there are 6 of them. It's just that some lines go in our direction, some lines go the other way. There's no way to deliver. Slightly less than 3 blocks through the networks that are available to us on our territory. I can hardly imagine that no one in their right or impaired mind could absolutely sign a final peace under such conditions. It's impossible. On the other hand, both Ukraine and Russia are exhausted. I see through all the channels available to me, they are asking for this respite.
Who are the Russians?
Russians, yes. That is, both sides are exhausted. And the main thing in the next few months is, let's say, not to mess things up. So, before we even answer the question of where our energy resilience stands, let's first figure out where we are and what awaits us. Let's do this without any myths. In essence, as you all know, you all noticed that we had an extremely tough July with a large number of outages and significant disruptions. This is an absolutely predictable situation because before the winter period, it is necessary to repair the units, primarily the nuclear units, which have been operating under very harsh conditions for 2 seasons. Also, a few weeks ago in July, there was an abnormal heat wave. An abnormally hot day compared to such a cool summer day, well, the system load differs by, well, 1,500 megawatts. Not too much, not too little, right? It's not all directly related to the air conditioner. There are complex dependencies involved, you see. But the fact is, there's a difference of 1,500 megawatts. So we have kind of passed through this toughest regime. We are currently finishing the repair campaign of the units. This week, the energy system is already balanced. You can see that in the last few days, we haven't had any outages. In 2-3 weeks, we will have a shift change for 2 more nuclear units. Approximately 1 large unit will come out of maintenance. The large one is 1000 MW and one small one of 440 MW will go into maintenance, so the situation will improve even further. And roughly speaking, if the current status quo is maintained, meaning without new painful strikes on our infrastructure, we can live without any significant outages until the very beginning, or maybe even the middle of November, before the start of the heating season and, let's say, the autumn-winter loads. We are not standing still despite all, let's say, the moments and diversions. Despite all the diversions of the current leadership in the energy sector and the overall, let's say, inefficiency of the Ukrainian authorities, we are still doing a lot. So, by the time we reach the heating season, around 1,500 megawatts of thermal blocks will be repaired, based on the current state. These are CHP plants. Some of them are already ready, in fact, repaired and ready to be launched. The only question here will be their protection. Because if the block is launched, it gets targeted. So the issue of air defense is critical, as is the protection of this new infrastructure. But we will definitely, certainly, indeed, absolutely, undoubtedly have these inputs. 5 weeks ago, at a conference in Berlin, one of the points stated by Zelensky was that by the end of the year, we will launch 1,000 megawatts of gas piston, maneuverable generation. He was, of course, heavily criticized. They said, first plant 1 billion trees, then you can launch 1,000 megamats. I believe this is a conservative estimate. These thousands of megawatts will not be. However, The president had a slightly different composition of this generation in mind. That is, he meant the initiatives of state companies. These are primarily Naftogaz of Ukraine, Ukrsnafta, Ukrzaliznytsia. There is the city of Kharkiv, Kyivteploenergo, and so on. There are many grants. USAID bought over 100 installations as grants, transferring them to these structures. However, the state company will not be able to complete this significantly by the end of the year. Some pilots will make it, but most will not. It will be February, March, or April of next year, meaning we will have already passed the winter peak. But the large non-oligarchic Ukrainian business is indeed very concerned about its own fate, and it is taking action. As an engineering company represented in the market, we are involved in these projects and processes. Therefore, not thanks to the actions of the authorities, but despite them, these thousands of megawatts will be introduced by the end of the year. Plus, there are many initiatives, for example, in retail chains and our retail sector, which have large roof areas on their stores, like epicenters from ATB, Novus, and so on. There are many initiatives for solar generation, combined with smart batteries and so on, and so on. In short, as they say, the rescue of drowning people is the work of the drowning people themselves. Business doesn't have much faith in or hope for the authorities. It saves itself. That's why, through these horizontal connections and collective efforts, we can accomplish a lot before winter. In addition, there are two systemic things that will help us. We have repeatedly mentioned in broadcasts about increasing our external Western interface. Currently, it is 1700 megawatts plus 250 megawatts of emergency assistance. Processes for its reapproval are underway. My vision is a bit more, the estimated value is slightly more higher than it will be, but up to 2200 to 2300 megawatts, that is. It will be increased by 500, 600 megawatts, plus emergency assistance, by November conditionally. There is another initiative. One thing is the external interface, and another thing is the content of the external interface. For example, in the month of July, with our existing interface of 1700 megawatts, it was on average filled to 1100. At the same time, there were power outages in the country, and 600 megawatts is equivalent to one or slightly more rounds of outages. This is a situational story, because due to the abnormal heat, it was not only here, it was also in Europe, and the price increased. In neighboring countries, trading is a market story. And the market conditions for us and our neighbors were such that it wasn't always profitable to bring it here, to import it. There is an initiative conceived by a smart Ukrainian individual that was presented in the right energy circles in Poland. This idea gained some lobbying, and 2 or 3 weeks ago, Duda voiced it. It is actually a Ukrainian idea. Poland has a lot of decommissioned coal generation, and the idea was voiced, guys, interface is interface, but we need to fill it. In our case and theirs, the quasi-European market model doesn't always work out due to market conditions, because abnormal heat on one side or abnormal cold on the other side, on both sides of the border, can lead to infrastructure not being filled. So one of the productive ideas is, let's say, the reactivation of Polish coal generation without intra-European environmental taxes, on the condition that this energy will be exported outside the European Union, namely, imported into Ukraine. If it is exempted from environmental taxes, its price will be low, it will be competitive, and by definition, this interface will be filled. So conditionally, increasing the interface plus this kind of cooperation with the Poles, even if temporary, say from October to March of next year, will significantly strengthen us.
And what volume of generation can they provide?
They can provide up to 1000 megawatts. That means they can reliably fill our increased interface. For example, we will increase it to 200 plus 250 up to 2.5 considering emergency assistance, up to 2.5 considering emergency assistance and medicines. And part of it will be commercial imports, and there will be some kind of delta, and they can guarantee to fill it, for example. This benefits all parties. It doesn't quite align with the European Green Deal, but we are. At war, it's a global force majeure, and there are few other options.
Plus, they will have the option with refugees. If another 3 million refugees go there,
Our strategy must be comprehensive. We certainly need to scare the Europeans with our refugees. But we must keep a clear mind and realistically plan and make decisions regarding the truth based on objective data. So, in the situation where that's what I just explained. Once again, we will increase the interface and we are guaranteed to fill it. Ukrainian businesses are building 1,000 megawatts of generation there. We are bringing back 1,500 megawatts. These are large thermal units and so on. We have a balance for the winter. Yes, starting from November there will be outages, but they will not be harsher than, for example, this summer. Or, for example, in November-December 1922, the reason for those outages was a bit different because the nature of the strikes was different back then. Currently, we have a balanced deficit. There simply isn't enough capacity in the system, but they realized that dismantling the Ukrainian drug system wouldn't work. It will remain intact regardless, even if they continue to attack. It will just be a matter of balancing the system. There are certain subtle aspects of the throughput capacity of some sections and the power supply to certain regions. For example, the situation on the left bank of Ukraine is worse than on the right bank. There are such moments. But globally, if the status quo is maintained, we will get through the winter. Moreover, even if the strikes continue. And as a result, we lose another 1,000 or 1,500 megawatts or something like that. Under even stricter restrictions, we will still get through the winter. There won't be any catastrophic scenarios or 5 million refugees. There is one red line. In Burns, we have 7,500 megawatts of nuclear generation for the winter. So far, they have not struck the nuclear power plants at all. Indeed. Back in November-December 1922, they struck adjacent substations, but did not strike nuclear ones, because the distribution facility of a nuclear power plant is part of the nuclear power plant. And a strike on the facilities of a nuclear power plant is a strike on the nuclear power plant itself, which is nuclear terrorism. They struck the adjacent substations that are connected to the power output scheme of our NPPs, nuclear power plants. They created very difficult conditions for us. Our automation repeatedly brought the blocks down to zero. And we were in such a mess, a turmoil at that time. There were several instances when the power system lost its integrity. The most severe case was on February 23, 2022, when we had an almost special system accident there. It took us 3 days to recover from it in the system. Therefore, the red line is a strike on the distribution facilities of nuclear power plants. If they cross this red line, it will be much harder for us. Even in this case, critical infrastructure will be powered, absolutely. Let's say the majority. In other words, roughly speaking, heating, water and sewage schedules could be very strict in this case. Of course, you might have 2, 3 hours a day of electricity. Therefore, we must take a number of proactive measures. That is, we must finalize our interface, resolve the issue with the Poles, and coordinate with the Europeans to exclude their target blocks for Ukraine from this environmental story purely from the export perspective. We must proactively, at all levels, including MGTs, without the UN, clearly articulate these red lines, so that the Russian Federation understands all the consequences of strikes on nuclear facilities. A nuclear facility? Yes, that's it. Rosatom, shutdown, total sanctions. He has about $120 or $140 billion in foreign economic contracts there. In Russia, of course, you can hide, but the entire perimeter they are building, from Vietnam to Turkey, can be stopped. Furthermore, generally speaking, it can be stopped as well. And the economic damage that can be inflicted on the Russian Federation after crossing this red line will be very painful. Well, let's say comparable to our losses in this case. That is, there is a whole range. That is, our diplomatic efforts, the efforts of our special services, our partners, and so on and so forth, should be aimed at creating these safeguards to prevent this from happening. And if we do everything right, then the energy card cannot be used this winter to absolutely coerce us into anything. This cannot be used. It is important to clearly understand this and not build. apocalyptic scenarios. I am undoubtedly a consistent critic. Our energy leadership. I am upset about many things and ashamed of many things. I don't understand why we haven't been doing what was obvious there for the past 3 years, what we've talked about 1,000,000 times on these broadcasts, and we could have been much better prepared to all scenarios, even the most seemingly negative ones, because any disruptions in power supply are a blow to the economy. Well, okay, we are on the doping of our partners, but still, those who were on your broadcasts, like Melon, Ligak, and so on, talked about all the consequences, our initiatives, and the real situation as in the economy. The situation is kind of difficult, but nevertheless, I am not discussing the military factor right now, and I don't want to give advice considering the reservations I mentioned at the beginning, but energy should not be a factor at all in coercing peace.
So let me concentrate.
We will endure.
Look, let me summarize this concisely for the office. This is just a summary specifically for the Office of the President. Office of the President, please take note. If we take the steps that Victor Kurtev suggests, Ukraine's negotiating positions will be significantly stronger, and accordingly, Ukraine can secure much more for itself than if its energy is weakened or destroyed.
We understand the entire context. We understand the Russians who need a break. We understand China. We understand the factor of the American elections. Ukraine must in any case build bipartisan communication, not participate in any way in this internal American arrangement, and most importantly, not fall victim to this arrangement. The Democratic administration currently has interest right now. They probably need an achievement by some November. Probably, they don't want to leave this card for Trump after the elections. Probably, a lot of probably. Other efforts by the US State Department and several dank envoys of the US Democratic Party are urging President Zelensky to seek peace before the elections. Before the elections, yes. And as far as I understand, President Zelensky is resisting this. Perhaps he doesn't have enough room to maneuver. Perhaps he has nothing to lean on. But this is exactly the case where the very logic of behavior, let's say, of a Kryvyi guy, in the good sense of the word, yes, I'm not exaggerating now. Not joking about it, yes, it will allow him to show resilience and simply hold on. Here, I use the cautious word, hold on, hold on.
In this context, we remember that Priska, who came for the first time when she was appointed, had many interesting meetings back then. She met not only with the office, but also with anti-corruption activists, with Kubrakov, with Naim, and with the figures involved in those high-profile cases you constantly talked about. So Kubrakov was removed from office after all those issues, the failure to protect Ukraine's energy sector.
The rent also moved somewhere, also with a small adjustment. If you remember, back on April 15th, I think, we had a broadcast then, when I was the first, at least I hadn't heard about it before, I was the first on your live broadcast to say, yes, there are definitely booths, there are turtles, there is our entire logical position on this issue, but the true reason for his dismissal, the main grievance against him, was indeed something else, actually. Wiretapping and so on. Yes, at that time I had many indirect signs of this. And after that biggest broadcast, I remember that in May, it aired about all these schemes of Yuragolik's big construction. And Nabu, the head of the dismissed deputy director of the National Anticorruption Bureau of Ukraine, and everything related to this with the perimeter of the mini infrastructure. So the screenshots that surfaced with Biggest and so on. Well, recently I received 100% confirmation of what I said back in April. That's exactly right, and everything happened just as we predicted. Currently, the Ministry of Infrastructure system is in complete disarray. There is no minister, some deputies are missing, there are no decisions, and there is a collapse of will and management. There is also no one in the agency. There is no director, no first deputy, no deputies. Everything is at a standstill. Funding has been halted. Nothing is happening. It's as if everyone has fled And only poor Maxim Shkil is writing various posts about how Shmihal is a scoundrel for not giving money. But in principle, everything was correct. They would have finished building those turtles right this year. Well, let's say the situation among the contractors is very tense right now. Everyone is waiting for some kind of Verkhovna Rada. Everyone is waiting for a breakthrough. How many do we have now? 66 acting ministers, I believe, in the current cabinet. Everyone is waiting for the new political season, and everyone is expecting very tough decisions. And tough decisions include audits of the work done, adjustments to existing contracts. I remind you, design and build, when you are given a contract of immortal value, you get an advance. They tell you to dig from here until lunch. Then you will design something, draw it, pass the examination, and we will pay you the remaining amount at that price. So, as I predicted, everyone who was involved in this topic connected to it, and let's say, implicated in it. It will all end in a big epic fail, scandal, economic losses, and so on. It was clear from the start that you shouldn't play cards with cheaters.
Here.
They played into this, so sorry, but Maxim Shkil has nothing to complain about. He knew what he was getting into.
What about the anti-corruption activists? Everything has gone quiet now. They just drifted away and that's it.
No, they have sailed away. No one is in prison. My deepest conviction is that someone will still have to be imprisoned because a lot of crazy decisions were made and a lot of money was spent inefficiently. Yes, there is, let's say, a special caste with a monopoly on anti-corruption. We joked that. In Enerhatum, they are the wrong kind of corrupt officials. But in the agency of scams, they are the right kind of corrupt officials.
There is no corruption in the military procurement agency. But it turned out there is, and I think there will be a big scandal in the coming weeks.
Yes, he's indeed kind of a scoundrel, but he's our scoundrel. So it all smells very, very bad. Inefficiency, nonsense, no matter what you call it or whatever you want to call it, it still remains what it is. In the end, a lot of money was spent, the energy sector was bombed, and the projects will never be completed, and their construction has stopped. And it will not continue, because it is pointless, and everyone already understands this, and someone will have to take the fall.
Tell me Ukraine now. You just said that Ukraine restored something, 1,500. Will restore by November, roughly.
Something has been restored, and processes are underway. In other words, roughly speaking, we will start 1 or 2 units at Tripilska, they will start 2 units at Smivska, and DTEC will start a couple of units at their thermal power plants. Bit by bit, 2 facilities in Kharkiv will be restored, partially restored, and put into operation. And so on.
But besides the restoration of these objects, how much has the introduction of analytical information objects been simplified during this time?
It has become simpler. By the way, we need to be objective. It's wrong to lump everyone together and only criticize. In May, the Cabinet of Ministers issued a decree that significantly simplified the permitting system for such facilities. Basically, you buy the equipment, set it up, turn it on, and then after the war ends, you will legalize it all. That is, the permitting procedure is significantly simplified. That's the first point. And secondly, the Verkhovna Rada recently voted on an amendment to the law, and it came into force on Saturday, July 27th. This is about the import without input VAT of a large range of materials and energy equipment, which includes panels, solar inverters, gas piston, gas turbine installations, and so on. Therefore, the input VAT is roughly 1/6 of the cost that is saved, so to speak, essentially. Well, you don't expect compensation after some time. Therefore, there are steps that have greatly simplified or reduced the cost of all these matters. There are many permits for energy storage devices, for example, which can be built on any land, not necessarily on energy land, because changing the target, detailed plans of the territory, communities, sessions, procedures, and so on, takes a long time. The procedures for all these decisions have been greatly simplified. This is undoubtedly a big plus. That is why. It allows the private sector to quickly build and install all of this. And by the end of the year, thousands of megawatts, give or take, will be introduced.
Does this mean that the positions of monopolists like Akhmetov are weakening now?
Yes, it means, well, first of all, let's start with the fact that their infrastructure is largely, literally destroyed. Well, if we talk about Akhmetov, they're about first Metinvest, which includes the two largest metallurgical plants in Mariupol, and then a bunch of energy capacities. Yes, these are billions of dollars in direct losses. That's on one hand. On the other hand, the regulatory field is changing. It is becoming more client-oriented, so to speak. Not without nuances, not without excesses, but nevertheless. So we are moving forward.
Look, you are setting up generation. To avoid a situation like the one with these solar plants, you set up generation, but then you can't sell that generation to the grid, draining the state.
Because you can't sell at night. There's no such problem. If you do everything right from the start, there's no such problem. Look, we have a market. We have market segments. We have a market for direct contracts. We have a day-ahead market. We have an intraday market. Right now, the KRNK has a major tender for new generation to regulate the system on August 15th. So processes are ongoing. They are ongoing. We have one big clan. It's Energoatom, and we are extremely proud of it, as it represents our unity and strength, with their absolutely and completely crazy, insane stories. Our Ukrainian corruption is cooperating with American corruption. It's an operation to save Private Westinghouse. Even the Pritzker team does not filter out such things. The day before yesterday, she stated that the strategy for completing the construction of the units is the right strategy. So it's 8 years. This is the wrong strategy. We will die. If we do it, we will die. And Galushchenko and his team, they are the ones pushing these initiatives. No one is planning to build anything. No one is going to build anything. It's impossible, for a million reasons. You had specialized broadcasts on this topic. In the end, there just isn't enough time. I'll probably release a systematic text about this over the weekend regarding the third and fourth units of the Khmelnytsky NPP, Bulgarian, Russian reactors, and so on. There are a million nuances why this is impossible, but that's not the task at hand. But that's not the point. The task is to pass the law. That couldn't be pushed through in July despite strong efforts. The task is to formally pass the law and start spending, and accordingly, embezzling money on the preparations for this construction, which will never happen. But that's not necessary because their planning horizon is different. Well, for example, November of this year, there are only 4-5 months left. If everything is organized correctly and efficiently, it could be tens of billions of hryvnias. Such a planning horizon, such approaches, and this undoubtedly weakens us significantly. Energoatom is like a black hole in the system, and energy markets, in particular, a generator of significant losses. The inefficiency and theft within Energoatom lead to larger subsidies for the population, an inability to perform certain functions, and so on. This affects the global balance and the circulation of money in the energy market. Turtles, booths, all that stuff. There are 3-4 such big corruption stories that have significantly weakened us in the energy sector over these years. But despite all this, energy should not be a factor of coercion. Well, it should not be a factor of coercion for us towards peace.
Friends, please like the broadcast. We already have more than 2,000 people watching on both channels. So don't forget that all these important introductions that Victor gives in each broadcast should be seen by as many people as possible, first of all. Secondly, don't forget to support us. All the links to the payment details are in the description of the broadcast, because we have our traditional monthly payment of 150,000 hryvnias for the office and everything else. We already have about 30,000, I think, which has slowly accumulated over the month, so don't forget to chip in. And I have another question in the context of our gas and oil wars with our neighbors. After all, Hungary and Slovakia are the countries through which electricity comes here. In other words, they essentially allow us through these sections to meet our needs. And in this regard, the question arises, how large are the power flows going there?
We have 4 neighbors. Although the number of networks in physical terms is slightly different, the most powerful one, so to speak, is the Hungarian interface. But for now, the interface is divided into 4 equal parts. This is how it works. That is, conditionally, we have NSUE Europe, we have Ukraine. And these are formally 4 different parts. That is, auctions are held for access to the section for these volumes. There are exceptions. For example, in July, things were not very good inside Poland, and Poland periodically reset its interface. Accordingly, we tried to transfer these 225 megawatts to the other 3. There are moments. Let's put it this way. European countries, European regulations, all those energy packages, free access to networks and blah, 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 but there are exceptions. These are moments of political conjuncture. Sometimes there are problems made out of thin air. Sometimes there are some virtual emergency situations. And sometimes she just says no, and that's it. Someone is going for maintenance at the substation deep inside come in November. We just don't have the technical capability. No, it happens sometimes. That's why it's a complicated story. We need to maneuver, so to speak. We need to maneuver. Therefore, any decision undoubtedly has consequences. The decision on whether there will be a transit of Russian gas, whether there will be a new contract or not, has consequences. These need to be calculated very carefully, but these cannot be decisions taken out of the overall context. We must pursue a centralized and unified proactive policy in order to... Because, well, the big question is, why do we still have transit after February 24, 2022? But maybe the policy could have been conducted differently. However, it cannot be taken out of context. In other words, this is not a decision at the level of the Ukrainian GTS operator, whether to continue the contract or not. We are a country at war. This is, generally speaking, the energy front and ultimately the decision of the Supreme Commander.
In any case, there is a complex set of problems here because Hungary...
They are interconnected, they will blackmail, it hurts them, they will blackmail, because these energy resources are essentially a form of political corruption and bribery of loyalty, buying the loyalty of these countries. Orbán is not just working as the devil's advocate for nothing, he is doing it for money.
Well, just like Slovakia.
Of course.
Fica there, right? Of course. Austria too. Austria's special position. I mean, they all receive this gas and oil, and this gives them competitive advantages. Yes, because it significantly reduces costs. Absolutely.
That's it.
It turns out to be the case throughout the entire chain. Absolutely. So, well, it is indeed a complex problem.
But nevertheless. Not immediately, of course. We would have liked it to be faster. But we have achieved significant, let's say, significant progress on the way to ousting Russia from European energy markets. In other words, the European energy market is actually lost for Russia. The gas market is lost. Any directions towards China, Central Asia, and so on are insufficient. Russia has lost the 200 billion European gas market. This is an irreparable situation, and it has a cumulative effect because the loss this quarter is conditionally due to last year's technological problems. When your gas balance is disrupted and all the underground storage within Russia is filled, you don't know where to put it, especially when there is no export. All these directions, like to China, are insufficient. So, you start to reduce gas production at the wells. The production volumes drop because there's simply nowhere to put the gas, or you have to burn it off in flares. If you look at the oil and gas sector of the Russian Federation, it has a lot of inertia. It is technologically starting to fall apart. That is, they have had no oil field services since the active war began. All the oil field services were done by a few companies, Halliburton, Schlumberger, and so on. They don't have it in Russia. So, there are no sanctions on specific equipment, even if specialists are conditionally poached, and so on. The market is completely lost. All supply chains are disrupted. Even in the last month, 80% of payments in yuan have been halted. Generally speaking, they are on the verge of a grand upheaval. And when I say we need to hold on, A large number of these curves within the Russian crisis will converge at one point very soon in the fall, and it will be quite intense. We must not collapse because, by and large, circumstances are such that we probably cannot deliver a military defeat to the Russian Federation on the battlefield. For various reasons. It could have been different, perhaps. If we had behaved differently in 2022 than in 2023, probably, there would have been other, let's say, opportunities. Yes, possibilities. Otherwise, the counteroffensive would probably have ended, and so on and so on. But history does not tolerate subjunctive moods. So, we have what we have. We indeed acknowledge the fact that we probably cannot restore the borders of 1991 by military means. We can only do this in one specific case, specifically in the case of an internal collapse in Russia, its internal disorganization and instability, and so on and so forth.
And in principle, without signing. Any peace agreements, or even a truce on unfavorable terms for Ukraine, we will gain this time, and it is already working in our favor, I absolutely believe. Indeed, do not fear that a victory for Trump, or a victory for Harris, will undoubtedly introduce any new variables that will force Ukraine to sign without looking.
I belong to that minority which believes that a Republican victory in the USA is a more favorable outcome for Ukraine. It's a long conversation as to why I think so. Again, this is not based on any publicly available analysis, but on a whole range of different tracks, and so on. But that's what I think. That's what I think.
Tell me another question that worries. Many people, because this information is constantly coming in, and I have to discuss it with our ordinary citizens. Regarding the export of electricity, there is none. We lack electricity because someone there. That is not the case.
So 99% of these rumors are based on some link on the internet, on some little program that shows instant flows between countries over networks. Only these ring flows indeed matter, let's say the cumulative net flow actually. And it has been strictly negative for a long time because we import and receive emergency assistance. And at some point in time, on some specific line, there might be a flow towards Romania, but that doesn't mean we have an export.
This is a forecast that things are not so bad in the Russian Federation from the outside, despite our strikes on their infrastructure. By the way, what did our strikes on their infrastructure in the Rostov region show, when their south was practically out of power for almost a week?
What did they show? Well, first of all, we are no longer in 1922, when our strike capabilities were incomparable. And frankly speaking, we were being shot at like in a shooting gallery. The situation is different now. Yes, we do not have long-range missile capabilities. Our capabilities are much more modest. But if we talk about the energy infrastructure and understand certain patterns, points, and weak spots, and for each specific bottleneck, depending on what it is, the right and appropriate ammunition can be selected. And on some cheap, relatively cheap drone, it can fly very far into the territory. And if done smartly, in a strategic manner, it will significantly hurt them. 2 weeks ago, in our beloved southern Russia, 1.5 million consumers were simultaneously disconnected at peak time, and the turbine of one of the units at the Rostov NPP, nuclear power plant, broke down. And we understand that this is not a coincidence.
So they lost a gigawatt, right?
1.5. It did not fail. A gigawatt can fail, and consumers won't notice anything, because the system is redundantly reserved multiple times. Physically, all possibilities for regulating the power system and supplying power were exhausted, and it became necessary to disconnect consumers. Well, this part, that is indeed the southern part of the power system of Russia. And a little earlier, there were also several successful Ukrainian operations in the northeastern direction. In fact, actually, the Oskol metallurgical plant stopped, for example, by accident. This is a significant enterprise with an annual turnover of $11 billion and a staff of 5,000 or 6,000 people. Despite having the highest priority category and being connected to the external power supply system with redundancy, it suddenly stopped, and the steel in the furnaces solidified.
So it went out of order for a month.
It will take years. Under sanctions, these furnaces, electric steel melting, it's a difficult situation, and it's hard to recover.
Vitali Matenko writes, Yura, ask the guests why gas generator capacity is not being built on the basis of municipal enterprises in Ukraine, but instead there is an apparent action aimed at restoring the DTEC monopoly for Akhmetov.
Isn't it being built? Well, we have all the prerequisites, you understand. At the center of any process, there is always some entrepreneur. Well, I mean the main organizer of this process. But you have everything. Do you have demand? Yes. You have a deficit of 9,000 megawatts over the past 3 months in the controlled territory, and before that, at the time of the invasion, a deficit of 17,000 megawatts, which remained in the occupied territory, right? Or do you have demand? Yes. Did they simplify the permit system for you? They simplified it multiple times. Yes, it's not exactly an investor-friendly environment and all that. That's for the poor. Why aren't we doing it? I believe this is taken out of context, from some separate file. There are many things we don't do that we could. We are losing territory. As the living classic Yuri Romanenko said, the territory of Ukraine that we will retain will correspond to the level of our organization. That's how the world works in general, you know, right?
Just a moment, please. Question. Stopa Galuchenko and Enerhatom after the epic fail. Stopa. Galushenko. And also indeed that all Russian episode.
Does Galuchenko write? No, Galuchenko writes constantly. There are 6 of his favorite experts, Russian agents in parentheses, including me. Obviously, I have nothing to do from morning till night. I get up and think about what else I can do. To mess with Galuchenko, well, this is just not funny anymore, you understand. Even the circus isn't real anymore. Well, this is just a theater of the absurd, a warring country. It's just nonsense. When they tried in July, a week or 2 ago, to push through the law about completing the 3rd and 4th blocks, where the story is very simple, push the law, start allocating money for it, and steal half or 2/3 during the preparation for construction. They were trying very hard. Arahamia tried, Matavilov tried, Halushchenko came to the faction twice, convincing the deputies. However, these EPSO-Russian experts prepared the parliamentary body quite well. They asked quite high-quality questions in the factions, and Galushchenko faltered. And even those who had doubts stopped doubting after his presentation at the committee and in the factions of all these completions. Therefore, it's indeed a very tough story. They are truly unlikely to succeed.
Thank God. In general, in any case, it is obvious that the next few months will be critical in every sense, in terms of preparation for the heating season, in terms of preparation for the energy sector, and consequently, in terms of the organizational capabilities of the Ukrainian state as a whole, and, as a result, the positions it will hold in negotiations. Because in any case, I think negotiations will happen, and the negotiation tracks will accelerate regardless of anything else. Trump wins, Trump doesn't win, before the elections, after the elections, but it is clear that some kind of architecture is being formed for entering into. Here you are, achieving motivations from all sides. When the war needs to be paused, and also because the Russian Federation is in a difficult situation, as you mentioned, and which requires its resolution. Well, everything is clear about Ukraine. We've already talked about it 250 times. So what can I say? Don't lose vigilance, be rational, do what depends on you, storage, everything else, generators, solar panels, all of this will be needed. In any case, don't relax. Don't think as many did after the fall and winter of 22-23 that generators will no longer be needed. Some even said, why are they necessary? All of that was unnecessary. Well, you see, in our situation, nothing will be superfluous. Moreover, it won't be unnecessary even if the war stops, because all of this will still be needed. Because the restoration of the energy sector, as I understand it, is a matter of years, isn't it?
Yes, yes, of course. Certainly it's a matter of years, of course.
Well, let's thank Victor Kurtev for the broadcast. As usual, we managed to fit it into an hour. Everyone is saying it's a great broadcast, So, like the broadcast and share it everywhere on social media. You know how to do it. Follow Victor Kurtev. He is on Facebook. When will you do the article? Will you do it over the weekend? We'll post it, and I'll also put it on the wave. So, subscribe to us if no one has subscribed yet. Support us. All the details are in the description of the broadcast to help our studio thrive, develop, and bring you more interesting guests. We traditionally need to collect 150,000 hryvnias by the 5th of the month. Then, at 7 o'clock, we will have another interesting guest. We have 2 more guests today. Mohammed Farajallah will be on the Middle East at 9 p.m., discussing the strikes that Israel has recently carried out there and the consequences they will cause. And at 7 p.m., Taraza Dorozhny will be here, with the topic of a frontline soldier who regularly visits us. Sabotage and War, it will be called, and Ukrainian PMCs on the front. So, tune in at 7 p.m., and in the meantime, take a break from the information you've received, digest it, and be happy.
Bye.